I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
This is the story of Gerry Hutch, a modern-day criminal godfather.
If we start talking now, I don't know what the fuck is gonna happen. I'm not letting it go. People, they start grabbing at me, they're pulling me down, everyone's pushing me down. The joy was fine, I'd no problems in there. Of course it got dicey sometimes, growing up where I did, you either got into... But not a convicted armed robber. Doesn't wash with you, it washes with me. Not a convicted drug dealer, not a convicted, no. I told her not to worry, that I was getting a new pair of runners. They have these little wheels on them and a little engine, so you never get caught.
I was caught. I done lots of crimes. Some of them I got away with.
Now a job like that is no different to a movie, do you understand? Same ingredients, rehearse, plan, repeat. Don't just have plan B. You had to have plan C, D, E, F, G and the fucking rest. Plan fucking Z. Do you think I wanted this? But as I said, lads, I wasn't there.
So in November 2022, me and Nicola sat regularly in her car and reported from the Special Criminal Court where Gerry Hutch was on trial. And of course, many people thought at that point he was going to be found guilty. Then a couple of years later, we had him in where you're sitting, doing an interview, which many people thought would never happen. And now we have yourself, Rex Ryan, sitting in that seat, playing Gerry Hutch in a one-man play you've produced, which I think many people never would have envisaged making the theatre. It's still an incredible story, isn't it? The story of Gerry Hutch. Tell us how the idea came about. And of course, you're his neighbour. I suppose, what was your first memory of the monk?
He was Mr. Hutch.
Yeah.
Outside the Spar.
Was he? Yeah.
I was a young lad and didn't really have any understanding of the fame or the infamy.
Yeah.
I didn't have any understanding of his past, any of that stuff. Probably much like my own family too. I didn't really, I wasn't cognizant of anything that was different, you know. Yeah. He was just the guy at the Spar who would slag me a little bit.
Yeah.
He once told me, he said, Rex, come over here. I said, what? And he said, you should get a new pair of runners. I said, why? And he goes, so you never get caught.
Right.
So he had pinged me as someone, as a bit of a messer. And I knew they were a Clontarf family, so they were around Clontarf. I knew the kids.
Yeah.
We'd all gone to the same schools and all that stuff. So, you know yourself, Niall, it wasn't a thing. We weren't really aware of anything that was unique.
No. But you would have probably heard the monk, but not known why he was.
Thought he was a priest.
Did you?
Thought he was a stylish priest.
Yeah.
But the monk didn't really resonate, and we didn't know what it was. And then, of course, as you grow up, you start hearing the stories. I'd understand that it was a little bit different. As again, for my own family, I wasn't really interested in fame or any of that stuff. And then I was realizing that my dad was in the business and all of these things. And then, there are seminal moments when it lands with you what it is. And there was one day I was outside Spar. There's a big gang of us. This Spar in Clontarf. I was outside Spar, and the two Gerrys were outside the front door, and I walked in to the Spar, and they were both on the front page of the newspaper.
So this, of course, is your own dad, Gerry Ryan,
yes,
who was, everybody will remember him, but he was probably at the peak of his radio fame. He would have been one of the best known people in the country.
Yeah,
much loved and presented, television and radio shows. Obviously, Gerry Hutch, as you said, at that time, would have been one of the most, well, is he famous or infamous? Probably infamous, but certainly, even my parents who have no interest in crime would know who the monk is and would have known who the monk was back then. Do you think that gave you a bond with his kids, both having famous dads, though admittedly famous for very different reasons?
Well, they both stirred up a bit of controversy.
They definitely did.
In their own way. I think that there was definitely a conversation of going through similar things which are normal that come with fame. You know, fame can bring a lot of great things to a family unit, and also a lot of shite. Sorry, is there?
You can shite and F away,
shite,
to be honest.
Huge amounts of shite.
Yeah.
That I'm still sort of not interested in any of that for the most part. It's a byproduct that can be dangerous and irritating, you know. But I think there was, I would certainly remember having a conversation when we were younger of trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
Why are we different?
Yeah.
You know, in that sense. But again, never the biggest deal.
No.
And then as I grew up, I understood what, this could be linked, I suppose, to why I ended up writing a play about the man, but I started to understand as a young lad of what his past was and what that meant. And then as a young man as well, when you're trying to make sense of the world, this is things that the play might challenge as well with what's going on now. You're trying to reconcile on one hand a guy who was a nice man to you outside Spar, might have bought you a donut, might have had a joke with you, and then other people are telling you other things about him that are negative. So, and that was probably similar with my dad, and maybe the son of the Hutch family was trying to work that out as well. So we were trying to figure out the dichotomy between what people say and the person that you actually knew.
Yes, the merging the public persona, the private persona, and the fact is, you know, and it is a reality that the people have shades of light and dark. Everybody does to one degree or another.
Exactly.
So Gerry Hutch, as people will know, was born in the North Inner City in great poverty, and became involved in criminality at a young age. Ultimately ended up becoming a very rich man, and of course the guards and many other people will connect him with a number of armed robberies. But, you know, and he would always say he was never convicted of that, and people know this story well. In the aftermath of this, he moved up the road to Clontarf, and he would have, I mean, he literally lived, you know, within a few hundred meters of you at that stage. So he had he had a dichotomy, if you want, of you know, living in, you know, Clontarf is the Sunday World always referred to it as a leafy suburb. I don't know if
very leafy.
It's very leafy.
Yeah.
But you know,
leaves.
A lot of leaves and
it's a quiet spot.
It's a quiet spot.
Middle class people.
Yeah.
It's not the cage.
No, it's not the cage. And, you know, so do you think Gerry Hutch was accepted back then? Was it just a novelty for the people around the area? Because obviously his family grew up there, his younger family, and, you know, that's their home. I mean, that's where they're from. Yeah,
I think they were totally accepted.
Yeah.
From what I saw. Again, I wasn't so close to a lot of them.
Yeah.
But from what I saw, it was never really an issue, and it was certainly not an issue in my family.
Yeah.
There was never really a conversation about that.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but it seemed to never be a factor.
Yeah.
Now, I grew up in a family where there were a lot of interesting cats coming through.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So things that some people might consider outrageous were not.
Yeah.
And I hope I was raised to have understanding and also to not judge by what other people tell you, specifically the media.
Yeah. So obviously Gerry Hutch, his life story is that he was investigated by CAB in the 2000s, and then I suppose went into a sort of criminal retirement, you might say. So you're born what year, Rex? We're not
89.
89. So through the 2000s, you're you know, becoming a teenager and becoming a man. And Gerry Hutch's public image at that stage is quite he's much less controversial, I suppose.
Yeah.
But obviously then the feud begins in Dublin in 2015, I suppose. You could pick another date, but really in 2015 with the murder of Gerry Hutch, it becomes a huge story across the world. How aware are you of these events? Are you following them? Are you interested in them?
I was really aware.
Yeah.
And not being involved, I was surprised how much it was on my mind and it affected me. I thought it was a tragedy, and I thought it was outrageous. And it was at a time in my life, Niall, I suppose, for the crime world audience, they won't know, maybe a lot of them, but I run a theatre, and I'm a writer and an actor and a director, mostly in the theatre. So I'd been working in the theatre at that point for about 6-7 years. I'd staged a lot of plays, acted all over here in Dublin, Ireland and Europe. And I'd written and created a lot of things. And I had my own theatre at that point that I was working on. So I was in a point personally where I wanted to, as a writer, try and tell stories that actually got real people into the theatre, not just theatre folks. So I was working on Dublin stories, just happened to be at that time. I was working on, I had a lot of mates from East Wall growing up in Sheriff Street. And I brought them into Clontarf and they ran riot. But I had a strange mix of growing up between being with the poshest, richest people in St. Michael's College. And then I had my mates in East Wall and Sheriff Street and Fairview and all those places where we'd hang around on the weekends. So that sort of stuck with me for the longest time. And then fast forward to around that time, I was trying to write plays about my old mates. That's what I wanted. And I was working on that. And that would have taken in Summerhill and places like this. Then the feud happened. And it sort of just, I thought, how can this happen in Dublin? And then it was even more resonant with me because it was happening to people that I had known or known of back in the day. Not been friends with, but I'd seen these people. So, we were chatting a little bit about Goodfellas earlier. Yeah. We all watched Goodfellas, Breaking Bad. We loved The Godfather. And it took the longest time, but that feud rammed home to me that when a bullet goes through your head, that's real and it's not sexy and it's a tragedy. And that's what touched me. And that was the impetus to find Gerard and start the process of trying to tell the story, that story.
Because, of course, it is such a compelling story. And, there's, as you said, there's a huge human cost and a huge human cost for families. But there's also an incredible level of drama, I suppose, in it, just given its nature.
Yeah.
Now, I remember Gerry Hutch is arrested in Spain and after, evading police attention, let's put it that way. And then he is ultimately brought back to prison where he's placed on remand after being charged with the murder of David Byrne, which he would ultimately be found not guilty of, which everybody will remember. But at that point, he's kept in remand in Wheatfield prison. And that's your first contact with him, I suppose, isn't it? Comes in Wheatfield prison. Tell us exactly how that came about.
I went about some investigating about how to get on to him. Obviously very difficult when someone's in prison. And
did you have an idea then of what you were going to do, what you wanted to do, or was it?
Yeah, Niall. I had the idea in my head that I thought I could play him.
Yeah.
I was confident I had enough experience on stage and character acting, I suppose, that I thought I could play him. I didn't think it'd be too much of a leap.
Yeah.
What I thought would be difficult was getting Gerard to agree to meet me.
Yeah.
Let me do research.
Yeah.
Let me talk to him and then let me write a play that was quite challenging to him. That was the biggest challenge for me. So I went about finding ways to get a Zoom into the
presumably through personal contacts and
all of that, yeah.
And did the prison officials, they were okay with?
So it's quite a bizarre thing that happens. I got the go ahead. You have to be put on a register.
Yeah, at which point we always get knocked off because we're journalists. So
yeah, they don't want you in there.
No.
Only the trustworthy can go in there.
Exactly, only
Niall.
the artists.
Only the artiste.
Yeah.
I got the link. It's a bizarre thing. They send you the link, comes in your email, gives you a time, gives you a time limit, gives you a code.
Yeah.
And then there's a set of rules. Like, you can't have the Sunday World sitting in the back with the recorders.
No.
So I was in my theatre. I said to my wife, I go, I'm just having a meeting. She says, with who? And I said, Gerry Hutch.
Yeah. And at this point, he's on remand, though, isn't he? He's waiting a trial for murder.
He was in prison when I chatted to him. But yes.
Yeah.
So I got the Zoom link. I went downstairs to the office, and my plan was, I didn't have too much of a plan.
Yeah.
But I knew I wanted to play him. I knew I wanted to tell this story, and big thing for me was I didn't want to do this, even though I hadn't seen these people in years, and I'd gone, I was totally disconnected from that world. But I didn't want to do it without his agreement.
Yeah.
And there's a number of reasons for that. A lot of my favourite films are biopics about people with similar backgrounds and all those things. I did know that the directors and the writers often had a connection with them.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful with it. You have to keep it distant as well, because I have to stay as objective as I can. But I knew that if I was going to try and do this to a high level, I needed to get the blessing, and I needed to be around them to get the energy and to help me write the script. And I needed to not just have secondhand information.
Yeah.
So when I did meet him, you press the Zoom link, this bearded individual comes up on my screen.
Quite Messiah-like, isn't he? And the look of him at that point, because I would have seen him in court. Obviously, people saw him then when he came out.
The whole look, the long hair and the setup. How are your legs?
Yeah.
I said, how are you, Gerry? Haven't seen you in a while. And then we had a meeting that was essentially, I think you get 25 minutes. 24 of them was talking about Heat.
Yeah.
Robert De Niro and Al Pacino.
Yeah.
Our favourite film. Once Upon a Time. Our favourite films. Once Upon a Time in America, Heat.
Yeah.
Catching up. And a thing goes, a little warning, you've got a minute. I thought, bollocks, I haven't even done my pitch.
Yeah.
My big pitch plan.
Yeah.
So in 60 seconds, I go, look, I want to play you on stage in a one-man show. I've got a theatre, and then after that, I want to develop it into something much bigger. The Ambassador and beyond. Yeah. Maybe television. I said, Gerard, I think I can play you. It's going to be challenging. I need your blessing before I go off and write this, and I need to be able to do it the way I need to do it. And he said, Rex, you do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah.
And I said, thank you very much. And then he got cut off.
And at that point then, you'd obviously known him as a child, really. And had a child's perception of him, just a man, a pleasant man, or, a bit of a laugh.
Yes.
Did you get a different perception of him then as you're, a man, a fully grown man who's lived more of a life? Did you feel a different perception of him at that point? And obviously as well, he's at a very vulnerable position there, because he's, he doesn't know that he's ultimately going to be cleared of that murder.
Yes, it's very interesting, the power of information.
Yeah.
How it causes your perception to change, or not change, or just have ideas about someone that you wouldn't have had before. And when you're a child and you meet the person, none of it occurs to you.
Yeah.
And then after seeing all of this crazy stuff in the news and everything they'd been through, and how real all that was, and immediate and disarming and jarring, when I did, and also the image of seeing the man in the cell that I had seen happily walking around Clontarf when I was a kid. Again, it was a smash of reality.
Yeah.
It was a real smash of reality of all the things that people talk about in the pub, that we watch about, the series we watch, all these things. And that was just a real moment of, people do die, people do go to prison. There are consequences, even for people that you knew.
Yeah. So, and in a way, that's how you've staged your play, isn't it? It starts at that moment where he's waiting. Is it 5 minutes before the verdict is due to come in?
Right on, yeah.
Yeah. So you've set it in that moment, which is really if Gerry Hutch had been found guilty, he effectively would have spent the rest of his life in prison.
Yes.
And of course, we know that he didn't. He walks out the front door a couple of hours later. But it's really a moment where everything is at stake. I mean, obviously, I was there that day. And, I've been at some of these cases, for example, Joe Riley being found guilty. And, it might look, in retrospect, you might look at that moment and think, there was a good chance he was going to be found not guilty. But when you're sitting there, you can't know. And particularly if people might not remember, the other two guys were found, Paul Murphy and Jason Bonney had been found guilty of offences earlier that morning. So it was very, very hard to know, even as that the verdict is being read, which is a long verdict. Why did you choose that moment?
Question for you.
Yeah.
Was the general consensus from you guys that was a total 50-50?
Well, if you, I have a history of getting things wrong, by the way, but if you look back, in the run-up, I said, I think he's going to be found not guilty.
Right.
And we were able to say that because it was a special criminal court. If it was a jury verdict, we wouldn't be able to discuss it. But it was definitely 50-50. And there was definitely people that morning, very knowledgeable people who would have, been in contact with guards and stuff, who were convinced he was going to be found guilty.
Okay.
For the simple reason that nearly everybody who goes to the special criminal court is found guilty.
It's 99%, is it?
Well, I don't know if it's that high, but it's certainly very, very high.
Yes.
So it wasn't a foregone conclusion, but there was. If you had listened to Jonathan Dowdall, which I did over many days, he was a very unconvincing witness.
Yes.
But I don't think Gerry Hutch sitting in that holding cell could have been, he might have, I'm sure he actually would have said, I'm going to walk. But in that moment, you just can't know.
Yes.
So you chose that for that reason, I think.
Yes. I think this might be boring. I won't get into it too much, but generally, when you're writing a play, you're looking to plant a ticking time bomb for the character or characters, something that starts at the very beginning of the play, and they're going, there's some urgent need.
Yeah.
Are they going to go left? Are they going to go right? What's the action? And then you're into the meat of the play. For that moment, it's so emotionally charged. So you've got 5 minutes before the verdict of the special criminal court. You have an unknown quantity, which is good to start with that. And you've got an emotional high point. You've got a man who genuinely doesn't know if depending on one sentence from an individual, he will see his family, or he'll go to prison for life. Then I suppose it was a vehicle that allowed me to place me as him in that cell. I played him as 60 years old at the start, bit of a stretch. Me in that cell, and the 5 minutes ticking down, then it goes to 4 minutes, then they're calling him 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and the play goes into his mind. He has, he basically has a moment where he goes into his mind and time stops. And for 55 minutes, an angel of death takes him through the high and low points of his life. So what the play actually ends up turning into is a reckoning with himself. Is he guilty or innocent for his entire life? And then by the end of the play, he can walk out in front of the judges, reconciled that no matter what happens, he can stand there and feel some sort of groundedness for everything that's happened over the last 60 years. And that's what the play examines.
Yes. So look, I mean, we obviously had Gerry Hutch on this podcast, and we traced his life as well. Yeah. And it's an incredible.
Like I said, it was exceptionally helpful for me.
I'm sure.
Research.
Yes. Well.
I owe you money.
Yeah. Well, we'll take it in a brown paper envelope in the spirit of the times. But so it follows from. I mean, Gerry Hutch's life story is an incredible life story, and it follows. It matches the history of Dublin in a way, doesn't it? Because it begins in a sort of grinding poverty, and it sort of goes through a loss of innocence really for the city, in terms of he's born in a time with very little crime or organised crime, and he grows up in a time where that starts to escalate, and then he becomes a wealthy man during the Celtic Tiger, and then we get into a very sinister sort of period of violence and driven by the profits of cocaine, really. Did that attract you as well, that kind of telling the tale of the city as well as the tale of the man?
Yes, you've just given away the entire premise for my TV series. So, thanks.
Well, look, there you go.
You're spot on.
Yeah.
I think there's an absolute marriage if you take a little bit of dramatic license in some places. There's a marriage with Gerard's trajectory and the trajectory of a Dublin working class story.
Yeah.
About in the 60s, that time, massive unemployment rate in the inner city. They were still, the people of the inner city around from 61, 2, 3 onwards are still reeling from things like the automisation of the docks, massive loss of jobs, huge neglect, a lot of terrible decisions by the government and how that whole area of the docklands was dealt with after that period of industrialisation. And you've got families, as Gerard talked about on the podcast, 7, 8 to 1 room. You've got parents that are working their arses off. They don't even have the time nor energy to try and ensure that their kids are getting a proper education. So when you're going to a place called the Red Brick Slaughterhouse, and I once asked Gerard this, I said, well, if your parents knew this place was called the Red Brick Slaughterhouse, why are they sending you there? And he said, Rex, do you think they even had the time to think about this stuff? So he came from incredibly difficult circumstances, and then at the same time, massive sense of community. So if you're talking about the drama in the early days, you have that, let's say, Once Upon a Time in America, Noodles and the young lads. You've got this bond that the people of the inner city had to have because of the neglect, and then charting it alongside it. There is an incredible journey of, let's take Gerard, if he is the vehicle, pulling himself out of that by hook or by crook, by any means, all of this up for dispute, how he did it, the moral ramifications of what he did. But I'll tell you one thing, if I grew up in a middle-class family, very lucky. Challenges were there, but nothing like that. Small potatoes compared to that. And I can tell you, if I was growing up in Summerhill in the 60s and I didn't have a dinner, I'd rob a butcher's.
Yeah.
No doubt. And I'd rob meat from my family and my friends. And I think he got himself out of that. And then, like you alluded to, you've got this journey where he worked through all of that. And then, let's say, moving towards Celtic Tiger time, was there something along the lines of greed that mirrored the country's greed where we all went wrong? Because that was a time, I suppose, for Gerard of fame. That was the time of, would it have been the time of the Paul Reynolds interview? All of that stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe us as a country were overreaching at that time as well. And now, as you saw when you interviewed him, you've got a man who's in the elder portion of his life. And that's a portion where generally older men, if they've made it that far, it's quite a miracle that he's made it that far, that they want to give back, and you start asking deeper questions, moral questions, philosophical questions, and maybe you're looking at legacy things. And that's probably one of the impetus for the political campaign.